Welcome, everyone. Thank you for people joining. This is the Reclaiming Wellness Birthwork panel. I'm very excited for our conversation today and for our guests. The Reclaiming Wellness series is a series of webinars that unpacks and breaks down the complexities and assumptions surrounding diverse methods of expression, engagement, and wellness, and their personal and communal impacts on our health. Together, we move beyond the dominant narrative to explore a connection to land, tradition, and art. Coming up in the series is a panel on the outdoors on May 21st and another on foodways in June. Keep an eye out for more information at the end of this presentation and on our social media. My name is Luisa Martínez. I'm the California Arts Council Fellow for the Museum of Us. I work within the Decolonizing Initiatives Department, and I'm very happy to do so. I want to start by thanking the Director of Decolonizing Initiatives, Randy McDonald, and Kelsey Pickard, the Community Affairs Coordinator, for helping put this panel together. And thank you to the funders, California Endowment for Arts and Culture from the City of San Diego. So a little bit of Zoom logistics, although I'm sure we all live here now. There is a Q&A function and there's a chat function. So if you could keep your panelist questions to the Q&A, that would be helpful for us. And then in the chat, you could ask for help or share resources with each other. And we will start weaving in audience questions at about 45 minutes into the conversation. Also, if you can see the Decolonizing Initiatives in the Museum of Us squares, you can hide them by hovering over them and clicking on the three little dots and hitting hide non-video participants. Again, if you need any assistance, you can message us in the chat. This conversation will later be uploaded to YouTube with a transcription for those that want to watch it again, or if you want to share it in a more accessible way. Before I introduce our panelists, I'd like to make a land acknowledgement. The Museum of Us recognizes that it sits on the ancestral homeland of the Kumeyaay Nation. The Kumeyaay peoples are the original stewards of the area and continue to maintain their ancestral connection to the land. The Kumeyaay Nation are a vibrant Indigenous community that maintains their political sovereignty and cultural traditions. The museum extends its respect and gratitude to the Kumeyaay peoples who have lived here since time immemorial. We all live on Indigenous land that is the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary homeland for Indigenous people. Our panelists join us from the homelands of the Kumeyaay, Nisqually, and Dakota. I invite us all to recognize the lands we occupy. And I want to acknowledge that the futures we work towards, the practices we hold in these conversations, are inextricably linked to the self-determination and sovereignty of Indigenous people. With that, I want to introduce our amazing panelists. First, we have Rhonda Lee Grantham. Rhonda Lee Grantham is an Indigenous midwife and herbalist from the Cowlitz Nation, a Salish Sahaptian tribe of Southwest Washington that translates to seeker of the medicine spirit. For over 2 decades, she has been actively catching babies and supporting programs within the tribal communities, both at home and globally. As the founder for the Center for Indigenous Midwifery and the Canoe Journey Herbalist Project, she is guided by her lens as a cultural anthropologist and Native woman, along with her passions for global health, family wellness, and culturally centered care. She is honored to share stories, skills, and struggles and dedication of her organization's mission, strengthening Indigenous communities by honoring and reclaiming Indigenous midwifery care and family support. Thank you for joining us, Rhonda. We're also joined by Rochelle Vincent. Rochelle, pronounced she, her, has a bachelor's degree in psychology and public health that they obtained from St. Catherine University. Rochelle is the owner and practitioner of Lotus Birth and BodyWorks in Minneapolis, Minnesota. At Lotus Birth and BodyWorks, she practices as a full spectrum birth and body worker that aims to provide high quality, compassionate care that centers the experiences of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Thank you, Rochelle. And third, we also have Tema Mercado of La Matriz Birth. Tema is a Chicana home birth with midwife in San Diego and partera profesional certificada in Mexico, mother to 6 children and grandmother. She believes that birth work can change the world and has dedicated the last 10 years to birth and reproductive justice on the US-Mexico border, serving families on both sides. Thank you, Tema. Again, welcome all. I'd like to begin with the basics to set the stage for our audiences. Can you briefly describe the responsibilities of a doula and midwife and the notable distinctions between these roles and that of a OBGYN? Whoever wants to start.
Get a bunch of birth workers in the room that are used to centering others, and we're all like, pause, let somebody else lead. I will just say very quickly, because I probably have like the shortest spiel. As a doula, I just like to stress the importance that we are like non-medical care providers. That's what we have lovely pateras and midwives for. And we're really there just to show up for like emotional, social, and physical support of our clients. I practice as a full spectrum doula. So I meet clients that are looking for all outcomes of pregnancy. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're looking for a birth doula. I support clients through abortions. I support clients through postpartum as well too. So I also like to highlight that importance of a doula. And doulas traditionally, if we're remaining in scope, try to provide evidence-based, non-judgmental care. And that can take many different forms. So I like to leave it ambiguous because we're really just like a people, like you're our person, so we show up for you. And it's really important to have that much space.
I always talk so much, but I'm still just giggling because the translation box said potatoes and midwives instead of parteras and midwives. So that's going to make me laugh for a while. And I think that, you know, we have these professional distinctions now to just really sort out who's holding these pieces that have to do with modern and contemporary medical care. But that I also want to just honor that these distinctions, you know, have come about as we've professionalized healthcare, and that being in community with people and gathering skills and being able to provide, you know, the care and all of the wisdom that you can bring as a person in community is traditional midwifery, and that is Indigenous midwifery, where we are very much a person who dedicates themselves to strengthening all that they can to be able to support the wellness of community. And that might be, you know, working with plants and foods and, you know, community support. And it might be by gathering, you know, new skills that have to do with, you know, using equipment and medications and, you know, the gems of Western medicine to increase safety. And so, you know, I feel as if, you know, we really want to make those distinctions in these modern times, you know, and that also when we accept the role of being in this role of midwife, we're accepting this role of you know, tending to some of the physical, medical, logistical, you know, aspects of modern midwifery that may mean blood draws and ultrasounds and cervical dilation checks potentially, and you know, filing birth certificates and interacting in that way. So does anything you want to add, Tema? Does that feel clear?
I mean, it's not clear because our role is so nuanced, especially the more that we center community, right? But in, you know, like if we're looking at with the lenses of our colonized lenses, right? I'll break it down that way, and then we could break it down with, you know, removing those lenses, right? But I guess, you know, the midwife here in the United States is considered a care provider, a medical care provider that has, you know, our scopes vary from state to state and from license to license and certification to certification, but we're there to provide medical services. Now, some people are very happy fitting that role and sticking to the scope of practice that has been delineated by whatever organization or institution. But I would say that in my midwifery care practice, the most of the care that I provide is emotional and spiritual care. And then we go into, of course, and now let's check your blood pressure, right? And then the scope of an OB is medicine, and obstetricians are trained in high risk pregnancies and are trained in emergencies and can support with surgeries when needed, whereas the midwives and doulas are trained in physiological birth and in the very normal process of creating more humans, bringing more humans to the planet. So I think that that's the biggest distinction, is that doctors or OBs are trained in pathology, whereas midwives are trained in physiology, in the normalcy of birth.
Thank you so much. I think that's a great base understanding. I want to push a little bit more on this idea of certifications, right? And these capacities and these like different trainings. Like you mentioned, Tema, this like very normal process of birthing. I feel like, I don't know if on the other end, but in learning about birth work, I've also read about free birth, right? And people that advocate for like unassisted birth. Can you talk a little bit about that, and how do you feel about just certain types of hierarchies and gatekeeping, but also balancing that with, like you said, being prepared, being responsible for our communities?
When I think of unassisted birth, ultimately, as an Indigenous person, I honor sovereignty. You know, I honor sovereignty of self, sovereignty of body, sovereignty of self-actualization. And when I break it down to that simple layer of that people ultimately deserve to be able to be in the environment and with the people surrounding them and the resources and the supports. And all I want for people is that they have access to that which they're dreaming of. And if for people that means that they are, you know, with other people outside of the room and they are birthing, you know, within by themselves, then I support that. And I honestly feel like it's not in contrast to encouraging and supporting and growing more midwives. It's really not, because I feel like that option to stand in your sovereignty of solo free birthing should always be possible for people. It should be. And at the same time, you know, I am also dedicated to trying to separate out all of the reasons that people may feel called to do so, that have to do with the impact of colonized birth, that have to do with, you know, the institutions and the requirements and these rigid lines that aren't serving families to be served as individual, powerful people who love their baby and their body and want, you know, safety and wellness more than we could even begin to take responsibility for. And so I guess that's what I want to say, is that I think often it's seen as in contrast that but you can have access to all, you know, all of these deep friendships and midwives that you love and trust. And if in someone's heart, they don't picture them at their side, then that family, that life giver, you know, deserves to be respected in that. So when I bring it to sovereignty and not debate or you know, midwives, I love midwifery. I have grown up in midwifery, and I would love to say that I have trust that I've done my best for the families I've worked with. And also I know that, you know, I'm a person, and my energy impacts other people's stories and the realities of where I am in life. And that the fact is, you know, midwives, we're not protected from, you know, just being humans. You know, we are with all of the energies that we bring in, and that ultimately I can understand why someone would want to just be in their own situation, and I fully support people who want to do that. And sometimes that means that they call me for a question, or they call me for, you know, support in their postpartum, or ask me questions on, you know, how can I access this, or how can I get this birth certificate filed, or just situations like that. And I'm going to do my best to support people, because ultimately it's not about me. And also there are so many people who don't have access to midwives, who are wanting them, that I also am not putting a lot of energy towards trying to, whether it's somebody who wants to birth in the hospital or someone who wants to free birth. There's already such a shortage of midwives that I don't need to try and force my way into either of those spaces. You know, people should birth where and with whom, you know, is their dream. So those are my thoughts.
I said in the prep meeting I was probably going to get emotional. Thank you for holding us in that complexity, and that reminding us, you know, to think generously, and that there's space for different types of decisions and different types of experiences. Rochelle and Tema, I don't know if you want to add anything.
I share a lot of the same sentiments with Rhonda, you know, and at the same time, you know, while you know, for and foremost, one of the reasons why I became a midwife was because I believe in autonomous and making autonomous decisions and taking back not just our births, but our healthcare decisions, and the way that we go about our life, parenting, whatever it may be, right? And so for me, midwifery was kind of, it felt like a real tangible way to provide that kind of care or that kind of example to the people who seek my support, so that they can have an experience where they can say, hey, well, if I can make my decisions in my midwifery care, perhaps I can make them and believe in my own ability to make these decisions with other things, right? And so that's always been, you know, at the forefront, is having this autonomy. And then at the same time, you know, for many folks who have, you know, who are on the receiving end of colonization, and the bad foods that we're eating, and the stress and the trauma that we've been carrying for the last 500 years, or however many years it has affected our lineage, you know, many times we don't even so much as have the same kind of privilege to say, I do not want to have any care at all because we are stricken with diabetes or high blood pressure, or we're dying, or our babies are not thriving, right? So there is sometimes when we talk about free birth, you know, I think about that population of people who are wanting to have autonomous care and wanting to have a midwife who is not going to infringe on their autonomy, but who is going to be present to support during these diseases that have been given to us through colonization, that we're still working out of our systems, right? And so I think it's a fine line, and that, as midwives, we don't have to take a stance on free birth is good or free birth is bad, but looking at ways, like Rhonda said, that we can increase access. So I welcome families into my care who are planning to perhaps free birth, and I provide them prenatal care if that's what they want, if it's just one visit, if it's another visit, or if it's a postpartum visit, if it's just a consultation. And for me, as long as people are receiving the information they need to make truly autonomous decisions, then that's really taking birth back into your hands. And sometimes that means wanting to have your baby at the hospital, right? Or hiring a midwife, or not hiring a midwife, or whatever it may be. So it can look so many different ways.
I would like to add just one more thing, that, we began this with just delineating the doula midwife distinction. And I do feel like this is one area where I feel like we have to stand also in integrity of what skills we can hold. When it comes to birthing unassisted and being at someone's side, that's also a dance of what are their asks of us, and can I provide them? And so, that's this next element to it, is that, I do feel like other attendees and we need to have just honesty and integrity. And I don't want someone to go through my care and to have prenatal care when their intention is to not call me when they're in labor, just because they feel as if I won't be supportive of them. So I want that honest, intention, even if it is that their thoughts are that they don't know, that they don't know what they may need. I want to make space to have honest conversations. And I encourage, people who are supporting other free birthers to just stand in that integrity and complete honesty. And the fuzzy lines of, being a doula who, has also taken a neonatal resuscitation class, for example, that there can be these blurry lines sometimes of where, could you move forward and step into what you're being asked of, and what's being asked of you. And then, if there is communication and transparency and honesty, then whatever people are choosing to do or to ask, that is about their relationship.
Just really quickly, I feel like so many beautiful points were brought up, and Rhonda was going right along the lines of where I was going to jump in, speaking from the standpoint of a doula and at that, like a Black body, as Tema was saying earlier, as we're working and unpacking and trying to like decolonize our bodies and dealing with the effects of colonization, I would be remiss, and it's a conversation I have with my clients, to like not acknowledge the consequences that Black and brown bodies experience that differ from white bodies. And we had a previous meeting about this, so we kind of started talking about it there, and hopefully this feels like a topic that like Rhonda and Tema want to talk about too. But when we think about free birth, or unassisted birth, oftentimes the face of that are white folks. We don't oftentimes get to see Black and brown bodies in that space because of barriers, but that doesn't mean it's not happening, right? And that's the same conversation around abortion access, right? Just because we like take away safe and like legal abortions doesn't mean abortion care is gonna stop, right? It just looks different. And so as a doula, and as we said earlier, like it's really important that like when we're in birth work, like it's not about me. So I don't take a stance about yay or nay, or I support this or I don't support it. But I always, as we think about autonomy, I think it's always really important to have a conversation with folks about like, what does true informed consent look like? And if you're consenting into this type of a birth, you need to know or try to know all aspects of what comes with that. Where if there's an emergency, you need to transfer. What does that mean? Filing the birth certificate, if you haven't made connections with like beautiful midwives like Rhonda and Tema that are willing to assist you through that, what's your plan there? And just being, as unfortunate as it is that like so much of your body isn't like in this sense, like all these systems have unfettered access to your body and it should not be like that. But here we are in place and time, like how are we making sure to set up as many safeguards as possible so that when you step into the situation, things can go as safely as possible. And I don't mean it in like a surveillance way. I mean it as a very like straight way. And also Rhonda brought up a very good point about how lines can blur. And I actually want to kind of say, I don't feel like those lines are blurry. They shouldn't be blurry as a doula. As a midwife, I could see that. And I get scope and like certificates and all that stuff is really rooted in white supremacy and patriarchy and like, I'm going to curse and bullshit, right? I totally get that. But as a doula, like if we're walking into this work with integrity, you should not be attending an unassisted birth and being like, I can be there for an extra set of hands, because that is absolutely not your job and can make it even more unsafe in my mind. So doulas who support unassisted birth or free birth, that is absolutely okay. But I bring this up because I've seen this happening a few times. It's really important to know your scope, like Rhonda said. And if you want to support a family, that's lovely. But I think we would not be doing our due diligence to make sure that even if we have all of these trainings in our back pocket, which is lovely, that doesn't necessarily mean that you should be telling families that that's something you can commit to doing. And as you're consenting into being a doula with them, because it's a dyad, it's both back and forth, you should be very aware of like what they're asking of you and what their expectations are as well too.
And I also just want to add, I also want to add that this conversation is also a challenging one for me, because I also very much have witnessed Black and Brown people facing consequences that are absolutely unjust, and consequences, whether it has to do with, refusing induction or, wanting to decline a test. And then also that's a whole other conversation when it comes to this conversation on free birth, is that the fact is so often the generations before us have been, they've felt and experienced the intense unjust consequences and of how, being in a place of privilege, of being a white person, even white passing person with education and resources and any amount of wealth, and choosing to birth unassisted might look different to someone who can be accused of making decisions that can impact or lead to apprehension. And so that's another topic, but I just felt like I couldn't not give voice to that because autonomy and things such as the privilege of being able to go against medical advice in any way, we have to also just sit with the reality that the consequences of making empowered choices are not reacted to equally, and that there's so much inherent and institutionalized racism within that. And so that doesn't have to do per se about free birth, but I have certainly witnessed people experience not just judgment, but broken families, because of the judgments that are placed on them, and the lack of trust in people being able to make their own decisions that is often placed on people of color and people of different resources.
Absolutely, Rhonda. I mean, I know of CPS cases that have been done just because you had a home birth and maybe you even hired, the best midwife in the area or whatever, but these, being looked down upon as um, that you don't know better or that you're being negligent, you know. Um, and these are things that I've even experienced as a brown midwife. I've seen how the reception of my colleagues has been in the hospital versus the kind of reception I get, when I show up. So, that's even another layer of this, because I've had several people ask me for free births, and sometimes they get upset when I say I can't support in the way that you want. Um, because from my understanding, free birth, my grandmother, she free birthed 13 of her children in Sinaloa. And because that's what you do when there's no hospital, the nearest hospital is 5 hours away. And everybody just free birth their babies, right? So yes, this is like the decolonial way of doing it, right? Or maybe just having your neighbor come over to support you, or whomever is around. But when I speak to some of my elders, one of the things that they tell me is like things things have changed. People have different conditions. We're seeing babies being born. Um, with different conditions. And even the elder midwives are tentative and will not serve people who are coming out looking for them. They'll just serve their immediate community, because that's another layer here that sometimes people don't understand when we're talking about traditional midwifery, is that these are long-standing relationships that we have. And there's also many times a different kind of understanding as to the responsibility that we have with our own mortality. Whereas here in the Western um, world, that gets all screwed up because there's racism, there's institutionalized racism, and then there's also this God complex that gets taught within the medical industrialized complex, right? And then all of the lawsuits that happen, right? And so many times the relationship that we have with death has been really blurred, especially because of all of the injustices that we have gone through. All of these injustices, that the kind of relationship that we have with death is based out of trauma versus out of a unique understanding, right? And this is a big conversation and I don't want to get too far into it, but these are all things that have been messed up because we don't have the same practices that we used to have before colonization, before awful foods, before enslavement, before all of these other things. So
I hear you so much, Tema. And I feel like ultimately, when we've moved, like I have people who proudly say that they are a midwife and they are a licensed healthcare professional. And when I hear that, I'm thinking of, who are you accountable to? And, and these shared, decisions and relationship that happens when you're in community with people, that has just been a bit lost as we've tried to be detached, and we've tried, and that's what's been encouraged to us as when we're trying to gain skills and go to trainings and go through schools, is to be these professionals. And that means like I'll give the example at the I spend half of my world working with plant medicine and half of my world with midwifery right now. And, this drive from, in obstetric world where we're talking about patients, these just, in a gown, no face, no reality, all the textbooks of just being, photos with nobody with a face. It's just these bottom halves that are cut and have been experimented on, and we can't feel or connect to them, and that's what's been encouraged. And so there's this word patient, and midwives are trying to shift that, and they say client, and they'll use that word, but the word that we use is relative, that they are our relatives, and that there is this piece of we are mutually invested in our community together, and that fundamentally makes the care and the journey and the sacredness of the experience already different. And so I feel like it's the families and the burdens on the body, and just the sheer realities of what have happened, if we just think of what has happened to our soil, if we were to just think about that, we just think of what has happened to our waters, if we just think about the traditional foods that we've been separated from, and the connections to plant medicines and the community strength, that is all there. And so we have both families that are lost because they lost in this way of birthing, where there are so many elements of our society that are broken, and we also have providers that are trying to survive in a system that's actively trying to quiet them, and so it feels it is exhausting and disheartening, and how do I look at this young, excited, newly pregnant person and say, and birth is a line between life and death. How do we even have those conversations? Traditionally, these would have been inherent realities. It would have been connections that were real and lived and weren't described to the mind, weren't connected to fear-based pressures. It was an understanding and a reality. And so we can say that, I can tell people that, birth and death is the same doorway. And that we will do all, that we can have comfort in, or not comfort, because it's never comfortable. It's always hard. But I can say that and acknowledge that and know that is the reality of stepping into this work, and also know that it's a devastation that is not something that is acceptable to us in our life. Even detachment to miscarriage, the number of people who suffer miscarriage alone, not knowing, or not doing all of this ceremonial work in privacy and isolation, thinking they're the only ones. The number of people who have their baby in their arms for the first time, who are, do not have the wisdom in their bodies that of being a part of nursing babies throughout their entire life and their entire existence. And so there's so much that's been broken that we have to be just honest, and that the work is different. The work is different, and of course there's so many elements that are exactly the same, but that we have to be honest about how relationships and living in community and comfort with what is normal and natural often uncomfortable. When I teach childbirth classes, I tell people, if you wanted the childbirth educator who's going to tell you, that you're to expect this blissful orgasmic moment, then I might not be the best childbirth educator for them. It happens, and it's glorious when it does. And at the same time, I'm like, I want to prepare you that this is transforming. It's transformation, and that transformation is often messy. It is blood, sweat, and tears. It is hard. It is a challenge, and it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be that. And so, but the learning to welcome that into a body in a time where we're trying to balance joy and fear and acceptance and faith in our bodies and trust, that we have been chosen by this child, by this spirit, to come through us, and to have faith and trust in that, often means that those more challenging conversations, it's not the time for them. They're elements that, people, I feel, traditionally just came in with. So I'm hoping that makes sense.
Absolutely. In thinking of this messiness, and of like colonial structures and different intersecting oppressions, I'm thinking about how we critique and disrupt white supremacy and these like medical structures that like don't favor our communities, and work within these community-centered practices. And how does all of that relate to cultural appropriation? When, I imagine, if we're all trying to work together against the white supremacy and these structures, at the end of the day, we want to use practices that favor birthing people, right? And favor all communities. But then there's this also white supremacist lens of like cultural appropriation. So I don't know if there's, I'm sure it's happened in your practice, but if there's examples and how you deal with this, this transformation.
Can I ask a clarifying question? Because that felt like 3 different questions. And for the sake of just like making sure that we can like properly speak to each one, I'm hearing you're asking like, how do we decolonize? I'm hearing how the difference between cultural appropriation and appreciation and like our experiences with them. I'm also hearing a question in relation to how do we as like BIPOC folks like reclaim our own birth practices and like what that looks like in real time. And I can see a relation, but I also feel like those are 2 separate questions too, if I understood what you asked properly.
Yeah, I think both are good conversations. I think I was wanting to get examples of cultural appropriation and how you deal with that in trying to reach out to communities, but still hold practices to be community-centered.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, I'll go. I think, there's so many layers to look at and so many nuances that are sometimes not taken into consideration. But, 20 years ago, in my time, in my day, when we were like when I was in school or in middle school or in high school, I remember there was this big push of like the big diversity push, right? And so we wanted to have different cultural practices or acts or whatever come in to the school or into the organizations that I was working at. And that was looked at to be like a good thing, right? Like we're moving towards diversity and inclusion, and it's great. But then with time, we started noticing that some of these things started to create harm, because when you incorporate a traditional practice without the traditional context, it's not the same thing. And that can create harm. And so sometimes it's like, how do we pick up these lost pieces that have been stolen, burned, taken away, or we no longer have access to because of borders, right? I have lots of colleagues who have DACA that are on DACA, and they will never be able to go back to their Indigenous lands to learn from their Indigenous healers, or they will never be able to learn from their grandmothers because their grandmothers were nearly imprisoned for practicing midwifery. So now it's like a scary thing, right? So, you know, over the last couple of months, there was big conversation in the birth world because of the use of the rebozo, and the rebozo being a textile, a woven textile that is used. You know, we use the word rebozo throughout Mexico very freely, but there are cloths across the world. You know, there's special cloths that are woven and that have very special significance that have been used across the world, and not just for birth work, not just for ordinary day use, but they're literally woven into the daily life, right? And so what happened was that the rebozo was introduced to birth work maybe about 20 years ago, when we had some traditional parteras from Mexico that they were invited. This was back when Mana had good relations with the Mexican parteras, right? And so part of these conferences were to make sure that the parteras had a say as to what was going to be on the itinerary and what was going to be, you know, what was going to be a part of the conference. And so the parteras decided what would be showcased or what they were going to share with the world, or with MANA, with the Midwife Alliance of North America. And one of the things that they shared was the rebozo and its versatility, and how it could be used in such a loving and beautiful way to support a pregnant body during pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. Now, because the rebozo is so beautiful and photogenic, everybody just ate it up. Everybody loved it, you know, and so it started to be kind of like they started using it in all different types of trainings. People started wanting to learn how to use a rebozo, and things got kind of twisted over time. And so people started taking trainings such as spinning babies, thinking that they're taking a rebozo training, because the rebozo is so beautiful and photogenic. And, you know, doulas and midwives with our egos, we want to look good on our social media posts. So look at me, you know, reboceando over here, right? And so the rebozo blew up as a part of like, kind of like the poster child of spinning babies almost. Now, myself and Rochelle are very familiar with spinning babies. I'm an approved trainer, and Rochelle is also a parent educator, right? And so we both can tell you that spinning babies is not a rebozo training. And, you know, for me, when I decided to become a spinning babies approved trainer, I kind of, when I was invited, actually, I was invited to become an approved trainer myself and Jimena Rojas from Tijuana. I was like, oh, do I do this? Do I not do this? Because I knew that the rebozo was going to be like, you know, that it was going to be, you know, that this was going to be something that was going to come up in the near future. So I decided, you know, that I would become an approved trainer for many reasons, right? The first and foremost is because of the population I serve, and because I know that me becoming a trainer would give access to other birth workers who would not take spinning babies training unless it was from a BIPOC person, And so with that intention in mind, and also with the intention that we are training nurses across the nation, and that such a large population of BIPOC people are birthing in hospitals, I wanted to be a part of the Spinning Babies paradigm, right? Which is physiology before force. So anyways, long story short, Spinning Babies and other organizations are being called to remove the use of the rebozo, because without the cultural context of years of apprenticeship, of years of just having this physiology understanding, it could be used as an intervention, and like any intervention, it could be harmful, right? And so that's like that's a current example, right? But because Spinning Babies has used the rebozo on so much of their materials, so much of their training concepts, even if it's just one little part of the entire curriculum, it seems like it's a really big thing, you know? And so now, you know, I've seen firsthand on the behind the scenes, you know, we started in 2019 removing the rebozo from Spinning Babies, but it takes more than just saying we're not, and Spinning Babies no longer is going to use a rebozo. It's taking more than that. And I'll give you a quick example. 4 years ago, when I launched my website, I was so proud. And then one of my queer friends pointed out that it was very gendered. Then I was like, damn, you know, I was like, damn, it's not inclusive. And the first thought that I had was, I'm just going to hire somebody to go to change my website and change all of the language, and then I'll be PC. But then I realized very quickly, that's not actually fixing the root of the problem. The root of the problem is that I need to relearn how, I need to train my brain to all the ways that I am biased. And this took years. And I promised myself that I would not pretend to be inclusive if in my being, if I hadn't embodied that, if I didn't understand why not all pregnant people are women. And that took me time to learn that as a cisgendered person. So that is what I've seen happen in Spinning Babies. There's been deep conversation as to why we need to get rid of the rebozo, and why it's not okay that we have our maestras who want Spinning Babies to continue using it, why that doesn't apply within our current context, right? And so what I've seen on the inside has been lots of conversations, and how do we do this right? And how do we fully understand that what we are doing and why we are doing it matters? Because only that way are we not going to screw up in the future with something else. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. I was going to mention real quick, if audience have questions, the Q&A is still open. We're going to go on for a little bit more. And just thank you for mentioning this concept of like performing, you know, like this repair when there's no like embodied change.
Mm-hmm. Can I add a bit to this, you know, the very current rebozo conversation? And I have a couple of pieces to just add to it. One is that when it is spoken to that this is creating harm, you know, spiritually, commodifying, appropriating, whatever that reality is, and also the reactions that then took place. So we had people who came forward and said, this is creating harm. Can you please hear me that this is creating harm? And then the responses of oh, okay, well, we're going to call our friends who provided these trainings before, and we're going to get them to write letters that say, oh, it's okay. They're good people. They can do it. It's fine. And that literally happened, you know, and I remember just reading the letters and just being like, how I could not give permission for, as Rhonda Lee Grantham, tribal member of, oh no, you can go ahead and make a steam room and call it a sweat lodge. But I'm telling you, you can, because, you know, I can speak for entire cultures and communities and tribes and nations and traditions and, you know, these deeply rooted practices. And this idea that any individuals can somehow give permission to utilize them, to appropriate them, and that then it's okay. And so that was one of the aspects that I found particularly interesting. And also, you know, the reality is, why do people feel this sense of ownership, that if you go and study with, you know, this, you know, this particular person, and they happen to share with you, I feel timid a lot of times when you know, there are other people at births, and you know, I'm sharing a particular ceremony with a relative that I'm working with, and from the outside, they don't see, you know, that I went to the headwaters of the river to gather that water. They don't see, you know, the songs and the prayers that I did to gather those roses. You know, they don't see, you know, the relationship and the time it took to, you know, harvest and gather that cedar and peel that bark and make that mat. They see that I did a rose bath and had a cedar mat for the baby. Looks simple. We could even just purchase these ingredients, you know. But this idea that we can just observe without having the creation story that came with that rose, you know, without having the stories, the names, the songs, you know, but without speaking directly to those cedar trees and those, you know, places, and you know, understanding that those plant relatives were connected. And so those are the way that I as a, you know, as a person from that is Rebozo is not part of my tradition. And, you know, I do use them in my midwifery. They're very helpful. And I can believe that, but you know, and I understand that, but this idea of accepting these skills that have been gifted to me, and, you know, connecting with them and having them be, you know, part of a circle of care. I fully understand that I can never understand the depth of what those teachings are. And I'm not going to speak for them, and I'm not going to teach them, and I'm not going to commodify them, and I'm not going to, you know, become a self-proclaimed expert in things that there is no way I can understand. And so whether that is a rebozo or teachings of the lodge or ceremonies during birth, I feel like it's, if we could just stop having these pieces creep in of commodifying and exploiting, these conversations would be so different. They would be so different. The problem was never that sharing skills midwife to midwife and, you know, offering them to each other so that we can all, you know, in a shared circle be able to do this work with each other. That was never the problem. The problem was what was done with it, and the exploitation and the not recognizing that this is not just a piece of cloth, and it needs to you know, be honored for the depth that it is.
I was just going to add, just backtracking to some of the comments that Tema made so beautifully. I feel like whenever they speak, I'm just like, oh, this feels like a salve, like, oh, so nourishing. When I think about appropriation and appreciation, the question that always comes into my mind is why? Like, what's the reason behind wanting this practice or this item, etc., right? And the thing that often comes to mind is a loss of your own culture. Like, there's some healing that needs to be done internally, some research, some time spent with your own elders, because your own culture has your own practices. You don't need to steal them from someone else just because it's cute or it's like niche and posh, right? So that's the conversation I'm always looking to have, or something that always comes into my mind is like, what work have you done to learn your own practices before you come over here and take somebody else's, right? And this is broader than just the rebozo, right? Like, I'm thinking of like mother blessing ceremonies or closing of the bones, certain types of belly binding, Mayan abdominal massage, practices such as these that have been appropriated and taken away, not only cause harm, but something like we often say, and like my circle is like, not everybody can come to the cookout. And so like, not all these practices are meant for you. Like, you don't need to have them, right? There's many other different types of positioning that you can do for optimal fetal positioning that does not require the use of rebozo, right? You can find different ways to access the same end results. And knowing that like sometimes these practices are rooted in a magic and a familiarity that like you just don't deserve or should have to have access to. So that's something that is always coming into my mind as we think about appropriation and appreciation, is like, why does appreciation need to even happen? Like, figure out your own stuff and like let folks keep in their community what's theirs. So yeah, just really quickly.
Thank you so much. We are reaching, well, not the end yet, but we're like moving towards the end. And I have one more question, and then the audience has questions, we'll happily take them. As a person with a uterus, like in thinking of this panel and like thinking of birth work, conversation with friends, I realized I personally don't, and like my community didn't really have a relationship to birth beyond like, will I not? So I wanted to have a moment so y'all can talk about the importance of building these relationships despite our interest or ability to give birth, right? As somebody mentioned in the prep meeting, like we're all born, right? So if you can talk a little bit more about this relationship and why we should cultivate it and what that does for society.
What comes to mind for me is that like reproductive wellness and reproductive healthcare is healthcare, just flat out, right? And so we don't need that extra added context of like, we should care about folks with uteruses because like it helps, like in a very gendered sense almost, right? It helps women. And it's like, no, like it's broader than that. It's bigger than that. From also understanding that like a lot of these practices are rooted in community. And so I'm thinking of like granny midwives, right? Like they were more than just midwives. They were like community healers because of lack of access, racism that did not allow Black folks to access hospitals. Granny midwives did more than just like catching babies. They did everything. And so when we hold these traditional skills and practices, whether it be like using herbs that are indigenous to your culture, or being an actual birth worker or an abortion practitioner, you are healing your community and you're also like sharing that access and knowledge around. So I think it's really important to like for everyone to know this. Also just, I think it like makes it, I hate the word normal, but it like normalizes it. Like it doesn't make reproductive healthcare or women's healthcare like a specialty. It just makes it what it is. Talking about like abortion or loss just makes it what it is. It makes it a common practice, and having that comfort and like that level of normalcy around it makes it safer and more accessible.
Well, I would say that I feel like it's important, plain and simply because reconnecting to all of the ceremonial transitions that we experience as people, as community, is important. And so, whether it is, a life that is coming from, our own body, or not, it is this investment and this shared support in that there are times that we are in this ceremony and we need to be supported in this way. And also certainly that our worth is not determined by how we reproduce. Our worth should never ever be attributed to the lives that are put forward. We all have inherent worth, and we all have a right to be cared for, and our bodies respected, and our transitions celebrated. At my age, I'm starting to look more where, I've been working with supporting girls in their coming of age ceremonies, and then of course with midwifery, and these next chapters are around supporting people transitioning in other ways, be it menopause, be it death, be it these other life transitions that we all experience, these griefs and joys and moments that are real and that connect us to what it means to be alive, and to be existing and acknowledging that we are ever changing, dynamic, alive, connected beings. And so whether that is with connecting to your moon and connecting to the rhythms that happen within your body, or connecting to people that you love and care for, and knowing how to nurture each other, that there's something I have talked a lot about with some clients is there's so often this statements of taboos in pregnancy, of what you're not supposed to do. And so, for example, there are nations that you're not supposed to pick berries. You're not supposed to basically take in anything where you are ending one life and, having that energy directed towards you. You're not hunting, you're not gathering berries, you're doing that particular work while you are, are growing a child. And so, people hear like, oh, I'm not supposed to cook because I'm on my moon, or I'm not supposed to pick berries because I'm pregnant. What I hear and what I need to remind people is, no, it wasn't that you can't do this, or you shouldn't do that, or you're not welcome in that kitchen. It's that you are in ceremony in those moments. And it is time for you to be nurtured. It's time for you to be gifted those berries. It's time for you to go in your lodge and be on your moon and have others care for you. And that is community. That is, embracing and celebrating that we all, all genders, all stages of how our bodies are cycling and in relationship. And that we need to, honor that we are constantly in this rhythm, and that we are supposed to be supporting us during our times of ceremony and challenge, and that was the teaching. It was not that we were dirty and need to stay out of the kitchen. That was never it. It was that it is a time for us to honor the ceremony that our bodies are in. So pause. It's okay to pause. It's okay to breathe. It's okay to connect. It's okay, to heal. It's okay to shed and purge and grieve and be reborn. And that's the work of right now. And as someone who is not in that stage of life right now, or in that moment, I'm gonna nurture you. And that was the teaching. So whether And that, in my opinion, is why this is important to everyone. Whether people are going to be birthing, whether people are going to be supporting those birthing people, understanding and connecting and honoring this process and honoring this sacred ceremony, that's that's important to every single one of us. And the fact that that has been forgotten, that we have carved away, that there's these, that people suffer in nuclear families and closed walls all alone, it doesn't serve those pregnant people, and it certainly doesn't serve the people who are at home holding their little ones and feeling all alone. And so this time and understanding, you know, the needs and ways to support, we need every single person invested. We need every single person involved in some way. That elder, that youth, there's a role and a place for every single one of those members in community.
Thank you so much. To go off of that, can we talk a little bit about how we showed this support? In conversation, Tema mentioned teddy bears and balloons and how that might not be the most helpful. So if y'all have any advice for how to show up.
Yeah, I just really quickly wanted to comment on what Rhonda was saying. You know, she's sharing, you know, these practices, you know, these traditional ways, and even in these traditional ways, you know, patriarchy kind of has seeped in. And so we put on these glasses of patriarchy and colonization, and we think, oh, you're not supposed to do that because you're dirty, right? And so those are the things that we're continually doing to remove these glasses. But for me, when I think about why birth is important, not just to birthing bodies and babies that are being born, is because it does take so much support and so much change to really ensure that birthing bodies and that new babies thrive, right? And so if we don't have all that external community support, people don't thrive. And every member of the community is important, right? And we're all interconnected. So if we have one person who is suffering from postpartum psychosis, the waves of disequilibrium that brings to the immediate family, to the rest of the people around that family, right? And so simple ways to support families, you know, ways that we can start decolonizing is getting rid of our capitalistic ways of supporting people, right? So instead of throwing a baby shower that's going to cost you $1,000 to put on, right, and then inviting guests to buy, you know, items that the baby really doesn't need, right? And instead thinking, okay, what does this person really need? Oh, this person wants to home birth. Maybe we're going to support by ensuring that they have access to that. Or maybe this person wants a doula, or maybe this person is interested in cloth diapering, and cloth diapering is a way to reconnect to the land. Learning how to show up postpartum for people, you know, and so instead of the balloons and the teddy bears, maybe bringing over those meals, right? And learning what kind of meals are appropriate for a postpartum person, because even those things are things that we've lost and that we forget, right? I have a sister who is older than I am, and they do not have any children, and her involvement in my children's life is so important. She's always showing up, ensuring that she's there, if not at the births, right after the births. You know, because she doesn't have children of her own, my children are, you know, under her, you know, she lists them as beneficiaries. There's ways that the rest of our community helps and uplifts me and my children as we're in those early stages postpartum, right? Whether that be meal making, whether that be supporting my partner so that my partner can support me, right? So there's all of this is not just to uplift the person who just gave birth and the baby who was just born. It's uplifting entire communities when we do this, you know. And yes, reclaiming those ceremonies. You know, I have a group of aspiring parteras. It's a mentorship cohort, and one of my questions to them recently was, where was your placenta buried? You know, and I ask you, where was your placenta buried? Do you know? Was it buried? What happened to it? You know, and so having these old understandings of where we put that afterbirth, that placenta, you know, that is an agreement that we're making with that land that we're born on, right? Like, we belong to you, and this is, you know, this is where I'm being born into, right? So there's also birth is also an opportunity to learn our our how our identity is tied with the land that we're living on, right? So it's an opportunity to nurture the ultimate uh, life giver, this planet, this earth.
Again, the beauty and the words like a salve. Oh my gosh. I have nothing to add to that. Like, that was literally everything I preach to like my families when I'm teaching classes. The only thing I'm going to add is all of the beautiful forms of care that Tema shared should be done for families that experience a loss as well, right? Like, community wrapping around and really upholding folks is the same continuity of care that we need to see for folks that experienced a early or late term miscarriage, for folks that choose to end their pregnancy for whatever reason. And that loss of care is how we see that trauma continue to live in our bodies and continue on into like intergenerational trauma as well. And then that's how we end up seeing trauma look like culture as well, because we haven't done that healing, because we haven't disrupted that cycle.
Thank you so much. We have a question from Brandy in the chat. If any audience has questions, this is the moment. We're almost reaching our end. As a Black, Indigenous person of color birth worker, how do you navigate the complex, beautiful, and sometimes hostile field of health? What advice would you give a Black, Indigenous person of color who is wanting to step into birthmark as part of their life journey? Birthwork. Okay. I was like, maybe it's a term I don't know.
Step into birth practice. We could talk for hours about this, and also just continually say that that nurturing our birth keepers is essential. And so as far as how to navigate the hostile field of health, or just the fact that, you know, we can talk about and teach and praise evidence-based medicine, and also I know how biased that is. You know, I know what research is being conducted. I know, you know, how even if I was to use, you know, what they consider to be best practices, that they may not actually have anything to do that is supportive to the person in front of me. So as far as how to navigate it, I think first and foremost is to accept that it's okay that you are not the same, that you are not the same as the majority of the people in those systems, and that we don't have to do things in the same way. And what is important and crucial, and how we all find our way, that needs to be supported and nurtured, just as if we were going through a pregnancy, and also in this ongoing way. You know, I talk a lot about how, you know, in particular, you know, I'm as a Native American person dealing with Indian Health Services, and how you know, our systems where we had our midwives and healers were one, and, you know, doing all of these different threads and holding these different threads of supporting life transitions. And, you know, birth was forced into this area of institutionalized medicine and away from, you know, the true work that it is, which is healing work. And that as that happened, there has been this great loss. And I see far too many people either not survive midwifery training. They don't, the level of lack of faith in their hands and in their intuition, because often at the hands of the preceptors who are supposed to be supporting them. And then to engage and enter into systems that speak a different language than what they know, you know, deep in their blood. And so, you know, I feel like it's a lot of different places. One, we do need more people out there. And I feel like sometimes I have to tell people, like, yes, I'm going to equally tell you that you have to be so much better at your work than any other person is, because the reality is we don't get the same grace. We don't get the same grace to fumble or to even fall, or then because people are watching and they're noticing, they're judging. And so that is exhausting. That is a truth. And I teach a lot of different midwifery skills workshops and things like that. And it hurts my heart to have to say that. It hurts my heart to have to say that, yes, you do have to work harder. You have to be more competent. You have to be more solid in your skills. And that even if you don't believe in these tasks that are being asked of you, even if you believe that they are not, you know, the answer, that especially as students, that, you know, I don't ever want people to have that they were, you know, or to be shut down for doing the work that they are uniquely skilled to do because of something so simply taught as, you know, a procedure, you know, the steps in a medical procedure. And so, yeah, we do have to just learn those things and be really good at them in a way that can be exhausting and a constant, you know, efforts that can feel exhausting. And midwives in general understand that reality. You know, an example I give is, how often do we get a chart from an OB office that's just horrible? You know, so incredible, like it's just horrible, but they can get away with it. Whereas we have to constantly defend, you know, this going against the mainstream, and, you know, our charting has to be impeccable. And it's unfair and it's unjust, but it is just the truth. And I don't want anyone to be shut down from, you know, doing the really important work because of these things that actually can be taught. Because so many aspects of becoming a birth keeper, so many aspects of being an Indigenous or BIPOC person serving your community, they can't touch that in school. They can't even dream of being able to know what it is that that we just have innate understandings of. You know, this language that we know and we relate to and can connect to when we're providing culturally shared care. And so, you know, I encourage people to just be really good at their skills. You know, do what they need to do. Study hard. Like it's okay. And then there will come a time where people have survived those systems and broken through those again and again and again, those barriers. And for those that have made it to this point, I want them to be held and nurtured, to be able to let all of those things that are not going to serve them as they're becoming the midwife that they want to be, and that to try and help let all of those go to the water, because they're not going to serve people in the same way. The judgments, the racism, the ways in which things are done that are not supportive, you know, to wellness and family and honoring strength. And then on the next level, I want to also encourage us all, you know, that when we did separate and, stop to honor midwifery as healing work. It's also that we stopped honoring that as we are stepping in and out of ceremony with people, that we are equally vulnerable. And we need to bring in our protection medicines. We need, to fully have space to process these intense moments, to process, the journey that we go on with people. And I see far too many birth keepers who have survived all of these other struggles that had every intention of pushing them away from their calling. And I see people feel so lost because they're not held in ceremony as birth keepers. They need that too. And so for some people, I really just am encouraging them that maybe they have other children, or maybe for their health, or maybe other projects, but they're a midwife, and that maybe their job is to be midwifing those midwives. And it's not just about teaching, it's not just about skills practice. It's about honoring that midwifery is a constant journey. We are always learning, always. And if we're not humbled by each ceremony that's ahead of us, or that we're witnessing, then we're probably not allowing ourselves to be connected to it, because birth is humbling. And we need to hold lodges for these birth keepers. We need, to honor and love them and care for them and bring them food, and, bring, support each other, and answer the phone at 2 a.m. when people just need a space to breathe and to talk. And that part doesn't go away. Whether you are a person who has just attended your first birth, or someone who's been in practice for 50 years, or someone, who has just had and been at this doorway of, maybe it was life and death, maybe it was, a grief, maybe it was just a challenge of honoring all of these different tasks that are asked of us as birth keepers. But I fully recognize that I could have never done this work for these years without that support network around me. I never could have. I needed those healers. And while I still will always ache that I had to learn midwifery from white women, I had to learn the midwifery skills from white women, I am very, very, very thankful to have had my tribal healers that could hold me through it. And so, maybe there was a lot of aspects that were about, I have to survive this because this person has become part of a system that is not going to allow me to exist. And that I want these skills, I want to be good at this work. I want these experiences, but I always recognized that what they could teach me was this much of what it meant to be the Indigenous midwife that was within me. And so go ahead, piece it together. I love school. I love just taking different classes from different people, hearing different voices, different wisdom, different ways. I have learned so much from, my global health experiences of just having all of the things that I thought were true be completely spun. Be completely spun as I hear and learn and witness people who view the body in different ways, or who have different teachings or different foods or just different ways of experiencing birth. And so, I hope that spoke to the real life truth that just like birth, I believe it's transformation. I believe it's blood, sweat, and tears. And I want people to be prepared that it is not easy. If people want a comfortable, day-to-day predictable existence, birth work is not that. It's just not that. And so it's have comfort with intensity, have comfort with challenge, have comfort in knowing that also you may be touched by that, and need to be cared for. And we need to give more permission and more space for us to recognize that that's what we need.
Thank you so much. I didn't want to cut you off, but I also want to honor our time. You're all of you, such powerful and inspiring speakers. If we can end now, but if Tema and Rochelle have a minute of closing remarks, I also want to leave space for that. So I'm still good.
I do have to get going now, but it's been a pleasure.
Oh no. I think we lost them momentarily. Yeah, Rochelle, if you have any words.
I guess to be very short, the one thing that I would just say is that just for those that are stepping into birth work, especially depending on like how you present to the world, like having very firm boundaries about like what you will and won't tolerate, and like having safeguards around that. Also, I'm trying to, like, I had a list of things I was going to get to, but to sum it up, oftentimes I don't consider myself a healer. I consider myself a holder of space, because folks do their own healing. I just help hold that space and facilitate it. But just because we do altruistic work does not mean that we don't deserve to be compensated or acknowledged for that, and respected in it as well. So take from that what you will, because I know we're over, but just being sure that you're nourishing and making sure that you are being properly compensated for what you do.
Absolutely. And as Rhonda said, that you also need to be held in that space. Thank you everyone for being here, to the audience that stayed, even though we went a little bit over. In the chat, Kelsey put the links to the Center for Indigenous Midwifery, Lotus Birth and BodyWorks, and La Matriz Birth, so you can follow our guest works. And there was a last question about access. So I'm sure if you reach out to our panelists, they'll be happy to get back to you. And as I mentioned in the beginning, as you're seeing on your screen right now, please join us for our next panel, a conversation about reclaiming the outdoors. You can find the link to register also in the chat. And yeah, we're so happy to have had this conversation, and we look forward to future conversations. And last thing, as we finalize this meeting, you'll see a quick survey, and that data really helps us better organize these events and consider your schedules and interests for future moments. Thank you, Rhonda, Rochelle, and Tema, who's now gone, but thank you all.
Thank you.